Mesa Church, good morning. We are privileged. We're privileged and we're excited to be back with you all again here this Labor Day weekend. And pray for those who are traveling this weekend. There are many that are traveling this weekend. And so pray for them that the Lord will grant them safe journeys back here to us this coming up week. We are in the third part of the series that we've been doing together. And this is the final installment of this series that we're doing together. So next week, things will go back to normal. Joel will be back in his flip-flops and shorts and yeah, so that's going to be an awesome experience. I was telling him this morning, I said, man, it has to be weird for you to be in shoes 3 weeks in a row.
It is weird. My kids didn't recognize me in class earlier.
And so you'll get the same old Joel. He'll be back into his usual attire, but I'm just grateful that he obliged me for the last 3 weeks and did this with me. It's been an awesome time doing this with him. And then, it's something when you just enjoy who you work with, right? Amen. Everybody doesn't have that experience where you have somebody within the office or the entire staff that you just enjoy working with. But I truly enjoy working with him and being able to just lay on his couch from time to time and have me a session with him and let him impart to me the things that I need for the day. And so I truly appreciate him. And so this morning we thought it very fitting to give you some tools for healing.
Yeah, we got lots of tools coming your way. Recap of trauma, so you guys remember what we have been talking about. So trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So it's something that leaves a mark, it's lasting, it's something that's intense, and there's usually high emotions involved in it for it to reach that stage. It's usually connected to circumstance or relationship, or a combination thereof. There's all kinds of things wrapped up in it. And then the next part of it is the psychological trauma is an emotional response caused by severely distressing events that are outside the normal range of human experiences. And that looks different for each of us because we have a different upbringing. We have a different set of experiences. So there's going to be some things that are triggering for us because it's so far outside the norm, and it's going to look different as we go through life. But that response has to be dealt with. We need to heal. We need to do the hard work of processing it.
And I think what you said is key, is the response to dealing with it, right? Because one of the things that we see all throughout our society is generational trauma that's passed from this point to this point, from this member of the family to that member of the family. And it just keeps passing and passing and passing and passing. But one of the things that I want to share and that we want to share with our whole conviction today is that generational curses never heal until someone steps up and accepts the challenge of the hard work. Breaking the generational trauma is hard work. And typically, breaking that trauma isn't even for you because you've already experienced it. It's for the generation to come. And so you have to be willing to say, though I may not benefit from this, I don't want any generations behind me to have to deal with this. And so there's going to come a point in time where somebody has to step up and break the curse, break the generational trauma that's been going down, has been passed around. But we want you to know that it is hard work. And as we said the first week, we want you to recognize that healing hurts. It does. But healing is good for everybody else after it's been healed. Like after generations of stuff has been healed, everybody else is good. Everybody else is in a great headspace, all because of the hard work that you put in. And so Joel's going to lead us in the tools of how do you respond.
So we've given you some tools already, but we want to give you some more so that you can step into this space, not just for self-benefit and healing, but for those that come after you. You are the person that has the choice of, will this change, starting with me? And we're not going to leave you on your own to figure it out. Here are some great tools that we've been talking about. And it's not an exhaustive list. You may notice some repeats in there because we tried to narrow it down to things that hopefully will stick for you. But a lot of these are intertwined with each other. A lot of them are connected to each other for us to be able to start it. So if you are going to be the person to change it, guess what? It starts with you. Means you are the person that needs to apply these. So these first set of tools that I want to look at are, how do you help yourself when you're in that space? And the first thing that we have to identify is how to emotionally regulate ourselves, right? Because there is an emotional response, as we talked about with our children, with the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. That's going to be the response that we have. How do we re-engage our active, logical brain to be able to do that? Because we can see it played out very dramatically in our children, and we can see it in adults who have never learned how to emotionally regulate. And if we're honest, there is a set of circumstances that puts us right back in one of those responses because it's outside the norm and we do not know how to deal with it. I do want to point out one thing with the emotional regulation. It's not always negative emotions that drive us to a place of suspending our logical brain. This can also come with strong positive emotions. You know, we encounter young people who are so in love that it doesn't matter what logic you share with them about the relationship and the future of that relationship. All logic has been completely suspended, and they are going to charge boldly down that path. And this is something that's been celebrated and retold through storytelling and movies and everything. All you have to do is think Romeo and Juliet. What part of the logical brain goes to the solution of, if we can't be together, we may as well just die? We have to figure out how to regulate that positive emotion as well. So I want to give you some tools to think about. One of my main go-to is breathing exercises. When I find myself in that place, it's taking that time to adjust my heart rate. It's taking that time to regulate how I'm feeling and doing those deep breaths. And I know it sounds silly, but it genuinely works. There's other activities that we can engage in. Some people turn to working out. They disconnect from the emotional environment. They try to get that physical release of a workout. Some people need a mindless yet focused and physical task. So things like coloring can be really beneficial for sitting there and doing that. A lot of my ADD people, this experience right now is something where you wish your hands were doing something so that you could listen. And that's why doodling and stuff like that helps us in those places to be able to actually engage the logical brain, to be able to get to the heart of what's going on within this. Music is another huge one. Our teenagers will tell you this over and over again, and you know it's true for yourself as well. There's those songs that you know you can put on that will help you to relax. They will help you to focus. They will help you to come back down from the place where you are to the place where you can engage that logical brain again. And as silly as it sounds, like hugging a stuffed animal or a person can be a huge part of that as well. And I love those Squishmallows they have out there. I highly recommend those. They make great hugging tools. So that's the first one, is that emotional regulation. The second part, it always comes down to communication, doesn't it? It's identifying that safe place for your voice to be heard, right? It's not enough to process it all in here. It has to come out at some point. We need people within our lives who are going to be a safe place for us to be able to share, to be able to process on the outside. And what are you going to do to be able to start that process of identifying those people? Another tool that we can use is notes, as weird as this sounds. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to change the way that you think on such a deep level. Having visual reminders is really important. I was just learning this last week that our brains actually have the ability to rewrite our own history through a process like this of visual reminders. So it can be through putting those sticky notes all over your bathroom mirror. It can be that reminder. You know, I've seen churches that do this where there was a church that I visited, and outside their parking lots as they left their parking lot were reminders like, you are now entering the mission field. And it's simple things like that that help us to internalize something that we logically know, but emotionally are disconnected from. And if we have that repetition and we can lean into that tool, that can be part of that healing process once we've identified what needs to change, who we need to become, and how that moves forward. The next tool is support. There's a lot within this, and it feels kind of vague sometimes, doesn't it? Like, how do you support yourself when you're trying to do this? The tools that we've been talking about are often a really big part of self-support. It's making sure that your emotional and mental and spiritual toolbox is full to be able to engage and try different things when one doesn't work, to be able to pivot and try something different afterwards. So the other one is it takes the form of people a lot of the time. There are people that will support us, and we as a church are meant to be this for people. Like when we read through passages like 1 Corinthians 12, it talks about all these different parts of the body, right? It says that some parts deserve special honor or special treatment, right? We need to be able to recognize that it's okay for us to be an unpresentable part sometimes. It's okay for us to be a broken piece of the body sometime and accept the support of our church. One of the hardest lessons that I learned through my mom actually is accepting the support of church. When I was 21, she got diagnosed with hepatitis C. She'd had it from a blood transfusion when my sister was born. They didn't screen for that stuff back then. She went like almost 25 years without knowing that she had this, and it became active. And our church wanted to support her. They wanted to bring her meals. They wanted to help with things. And her prideful self was like, no, I have to do this on my own. And she had a cancer survivor from our congregation, a wonderful lady by the name of Becky Richards, who sat down with her. And I was sitting in the next room, and I heard the whole conversation. You got to let people serve you. You got to let people love you. And that means you have to identify those safe people and ask for the support that you need and allow people to serve you, because that's the beautiful picture that God has intended the church to be. That means even though there's a high expectation for God, there needs to be high support as well when it comes to how we love and how we treat and how we help each other through the difficult times of life. We've talked about boundaries quite a bit. Boundaries are critical. It's okay to set a firm boundary with somebody who is trampling you, somebody who is hurting you. Whether that is someone that you love or not, boundaries are going to be part of renegotiating what that relationship is and saying, this is not a healthy relationship. This is not a healthy circumstance, and it is okay for me to say no more. It doesn't mean that you don't love that person. It means that you have to love yourself first, and you have to love them the way that you love yourself as well, which means doing what's healthy for both of you, not just one of you. And boundaries are a really, really difficult one. The last one on this tool list is compassion. There's a difference between self-pity and self-compassion, isn't there? There's a difference between woe is me and allowing a righteous conviction to drive you to a place that you find yourself isolated. You know, I think a lot of the story of Legion. What must it have been like for him? He was at a place of self-harm and isolation where he'd been driven to that place. But guess what? We do that too. With the bad habits that we form or the things that are done to us. where we feel like there's nothing that can help, nothing that can change. But guess what? You are worth loving. You are worth investing in. You absolutely need to have compassion for yourself. One of the questions and the tools that we can ask in that moment is, would I treat somebody else the same way that I'm treating myself in this moment? Am I being harder on myself than I would be on somebody else? Because if we're not being kind to ourselves, if we're not allowing God's grace to be bigger than what we think our sense of justice should be, then how are you ever going to recover? Don't accept the value of what the circumstances have said that you are. Accept the value and the kindness and the care and the compassion that God has for you. Because that is the right view of self, not that other one. And it's so easy to fall into that trap of, this is all I deserve. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Wow. Yes. What he said. Wow.
So there's more.
There is more.
Because it's not just about how do I deal with it, but then how do I prevent it for myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to notice that there's going to be some similar named tools, but you apply them differently when you're trying to prevent, right? There's one way of helping in the moment, and there's another when you're trying to prevent. So it comes back and it starts once again with where all of it starts. It starts with communication, right? So what are the tools that we can build in advance to prevent harmful communication? So one of them is to not overreact, right? If we don't overreact, that's going to be the beginning of where we can start from. If we're able to figure out how to start that process of not responding over the top and making a problem bigger than it was meant to be, then that's going to go a long way in helping us not to go back down that road. So one of the tools that I really like is code words. If you recognize that there is a relationship of value that you're trying to set new boundaries in, but you constantly find yourself in a place of emotional deregulation, when you see that emotional deregulation coming, how do you head it off? How do you stop it? And some of those can be like code words that we use with the people in our lives. I think the Love and Respect book put it as, you're standing on my air hose. It's not at all what the issue's about, but you're using a word to communicate to someone, what you're saying is impacting me far beyond what you intended it to. Can we pause here and figure out what's really important and what's emotional? Having that code word to hit the pause button, to be able to say there's a problem without saying this is a problem. Because those are two very different conversations then. So these are some of the tools in communication that we can use to head it off. Another one that we can use, honestly, is going to therapy. When we go to therapy, we can learn new communication tools that we don't know. Because our skill set is what's been modeled to us. Be a student. Don't be afraid to go to therapy before you need therapy, because you're only going to improve that toolbox that you have that you can draw on. And a lot of this can be through scriptural study, figuring out who God has called you to be, the kind of person, the way that you're meant to engage in relationships. There's so much wisdom within Scripture that applies in addition to sitting down and learning these tools from a therapist. So the next part of this is support. Support is taking time to ground yourself and learn what a healthy relationship looks like, right? If we don't know what a healthy relationship looks like, how are we going to have a healthy relationship? And that comes in the form of identifying people with healthy relationships and figuring out what is the way that they engage in relationship. How do I build that in my life and not this other thing that I've seen modeled? And you identify those people who will invite you in to have those conversations. I've been asked by a few people here and there to do marriage counseling, and the first thing that I always tell them up front is, I don't have a ton of wisdom to share, but what I can share with you is where I've failed. And maybe you can learn from my mistakes. And here are some of the ways that we've improved from where we failed. That's what we need to do, is have these open conversations with people who help us to redefine what a healthy relationship really looks like.
Right.
Surround yourself with people that bring out the best in you, people of character, people of grace, and work on your communication tools before you ever need them. That's the best way you can support yourself.
Yeah, like it's everybody here needs someone that will walk with them side by side. Everyone. And one of the things that I love is that God did not make us, call us to be an island unto ourselves. God has called us to have people within our life to walk with us, cry with us, laugh with us, joke with us, be serious with us, have fun together. You have to have people in your life that you can release your life with, right? And sometimes, and one of the things that I learned from an older guy, he says, whatever you do, don't release everything on your wife. And I said, well, why not? She's supposed to be there. She's supposed to walk with me. She's supposed to talk with me. He said, because the one thing you don't want to ever do is make her your punching bag. He said, if you need, get you a tiny circle of people so that you can love your wife and punch somebody else in the face. I was like, that actually makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that I really want you to understand and really want you to know is talking through it and having people to help you through it is the best thing for your walk and for your life.
Boundaries is about building healthy expectations. It's kind of like that advice that you'd give to your teenagers, right? Nothing good happens after midnight, right? Is there a reason for you to be out and doing something after midnight? The things that you can be engaged in, you know what types of things they're going to be. Well, set those kinds of boundaries for yourself as an adult too. Recognize the things that aren't wise to surround yourself with, that aren't wise for you to be engaged in. And part of that is listening to others when they tell you that there's a boundary that you should be setting that you can't see yourself sometimes. Because very often when we look in the mirror, we don't see it, but someone looking from the side can identify those boundaries that we've just rolled right over, not realizing it. And they've lived a different set of experiences and can say, you know what? If you draw the line back over here, you're going to be much happier. It's going to lead to less stress, less trauma, less drama. Boundaries are so important with that, of establishing what they are before. Because if you're waiting until the moment to decide how far is too far and how you allow others to treat you and the things that you put up with, you are going to put up with way more than you're probably able to, because you haven't decided in advance where that line should be, where that healthy line is. Do the hard work now of figuring out where those boundaries lie. And last is compassion. Once again, the best preventative for this is understanding your own value. Accepting that you are not perfect and it is okay for you to not be perfect, and that that is exactly who you're meant to be, that you are a work in progress, and that tomorrow is a new day, right? One of the tools of compassion that my wife does for me when I'm having a day where I'm down and I'm depressed and I'm just way down in the feels, she'll say to me, it's okay for you to feel this. Feel it. Because Scripture tells us there's a time and a place for every emotion, right? Feel that emotion, decide to be different tomorrow. Allow the grieving, allow the mourning, but don't allow it to define you, but choose something different the next day. And we can offer that to other people who are caught in that moment. But this is a great tool for you to prevent, is having that kind of self-love and self-compassion within there. So this is already overflowing. You can see how interconnected these things are, right? So the question that we ask next is, how do I help someone else who is dealing with trauma, right? And guess what? It starts with emotional regulation. You have to be able to get them to a place of emotional regulation that they're not doing the fight or flight, to be able to actually engage that part of their brain. One of the tools that I use with my daughter, she does not like being told to take a breath. That is not something she is about. And it just causes the emotional spiral to become bigger. Well, guess what? We found a way to make it fun. So we've turned it into, do you need to blow some candles out? 1, 2. And she gets into it. And she's doing the breathing. You can do it where it's a game where you're, having your kid in a stimulated place where you're preparing for it. Well, we'll talk about that later. But you can turn it into a game, and that can be a great way of helping somebody in that moment to emotionally regulate. It's breathing, it can be hugging, it can be listening to a rant. There's a lot of different things that we can do to help somebody else in that moment to first achieve that place of emotional regulation. Once you've achieved it, now it's time to communicate, right? We want to engage that brain to start logically looking at the problem and what's been happening, to be able to identify what to do with everything that's happened to them. Galatians chapter 6 has some advice on how to deal with brothers and sisters who are caught in sin. Well, the entanglement of emotions unregulated can be really similar. The effects of trauma can be really similar. It says, talk to that person with gentleness. How we talk to people is so important. The tone, the patience, the listening, all of these things have to be part of that communication. We have to be okay with them failing, and it's going to require us to be humble as well, right? It's not to lord it over them, it's to be that person who can help them to engage in a positive way. It's recognizing that we've failed, and it's okay for them to fail as well. And within this, there's more on the preventative end, but yeah, there's a lot packed in there on this. Did you have anything you wanted to add on those?
I just think that, when you're helping someone, I think Galatians 6 is the key to helping someone. It says, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. He says, remembering you, right? And so it's all about remembering how you would want it to be done if you found yourself within it. And I believe that Jesus even goes a step further, and he says that all men will know that you are my disciples by the love that you have one toward another. And so relationships, no matter how you look at it, relationships are what they are. And there's a beauty within the relationship arena that God has placed before us. But one of the things that God has for each of us to understand is that he wants to prevent, what's the word I'm looking for? He wants to prevent the negativity within relationships, because relationships are always supposed to help you keep moving in the right direction. And so we never want us to get to a space where the relationship is harmful and not beneficial. And so helping someone within the space of trauma, you have to remember, I want to be a benefit. I do not want to be a liability. We always used to say it I was growing up, and I played soccer growing up. And so one of the things my coach would always ask us is, he would say, today, are you going to be an asset or are you going to be a liability? And every single day, he made us make the choice. He had us to make the choice. And we had to verbally say out loud what our declaration was going to be. When you're helping someone deal with traumatic experiences in their life, before you even go to them, the question you need to ask yourself is, am I going to be an asset or am I going to be a liability?
The last part of this, well, not the last part, but the next part is support. I do want to give some things in here when it comes to support. There's a difference between enabling and helping, isn't there? Right? There's a difference. It's not my job to fix it for them. It is my job to help them fix it. That's what it means to be a support. If I'm taking the lead, then I'm not supporting, I'm leading. You know, Galatians 6, once again, even says within there that we're meant to carry our own burdens. We are meant to come in and lighten the load of what they're carrying and help them have the tools to be able to engage with it in a productive way, but it is not my job to carry it for them. And so as a result, we have to set boundaries within support, right? We have to have healthy boundaries within that, because otherwise we may find ourselves like, if you go to rescue a drowning person, they are going to grab and hang on to anything that they can. And there are many people who have set out to save someone else who is drowning and become a victim themselves. The same is absolutely true when we enter into the realm of dealing with people's trauma. If you don't set a healthy boundary of, this is my support role, to not enable, but to support, then that is going to be the healthy boundary, because otherwise you can find yourself sucked right down into it, and then their trauma has become your trauma, and you've become a victim of somebody else perpetrating trauma upon you, because you're the only thing that they thought was going to keep them afloat. So be careful in how you engage with that, because boundaries are very, very, very important when we're doing that. And then last, how do we help them to engage in compassion? This is meant to be an emotional response on our part, right? We're supposed to have empathy. Part of compassion is we have a feeling and an understanding, an emotional response to where they're at, but it can't just be an emotional response. It has to be a response of action, because that's what compassion is. If compassion is just a feeling, you're not really understanding what it is. It's meant to be something that takes action. So when we encounter someone who's in trauma, how do we show them that they are of value? So here's a tool that me and my wife use. If one of us is in that place of tearing themselves down and not having compassion, I have said to her before, how dare you talk about my wife that way? And it hits different. And she's had to say to me, how dare you talk about my husband that way? Because we have to recognize that what we're feeling isn't always clear. And some of the ways that we can engage in that compassion is to hit that pause button, to hit that reset button of, there's more to you than what you're seeing right now. And that can help to re-spark that self-compassion and help them to see themselves differently.
Absolutely. So how do I prevent it for the next generation? Two things. Number one, really big, communication. But instead of talking to them, the next generation, about what they should be doing, I think it's super healthy to talk to them about the mistakes that you made, so that they don't repeat the same things that have already been done. There's no point of them not knowing. And the reason why we say communicate is because sometimes we don't communicate. They end up repeating the same things, and then we get on to them about, well, why did you do that? Well, you did the same thing, right? And so there are times where I think the next generation gets set up better for success when we tell them about some of our successes and we tell them about our failures. So that way they know what pitfalls to look out for, and they know what pitfalls that they could potentially run into if this is the path that they're going to travel. And I believe that at some point in time, we have to begin to speak positive affirmations to them and let them know how great they're going to be before they make it. Don't just tell them, hey, good job once they've done it. No, tell them, good job, you're going to get there, keep pushing. If the next generation is going to be great, we have to start cheerleading for them now. Let them know what they're going to be doing. Let them know how they're going to be successful. Sometimes success comes because you spoke it to them first. Right. And a lot of times when you speak success to them, they will begin to start feeling successful before they even reach the finish line. And so not only do we have to communicate with them, but I think that we have to show them some grace. Remember, you were 18 before. You were 21 before. And you know the tricks of the trade, and you know how the pressures of society comes, and you know what it's like to be 25, and you know what it's like to be 16. Never forget where you came from. It's not to suggest you're excusing behavior. It's just saying, I've been there, and instead of coming down hard on you, let's talk about this. Let's talk about why this is not a good choice. Let's talk about why this is not a healthy choice. Let's talk about why a better decision could have been made. I'm going to help you walk through making a better decision the next time. And at some point, you hope and you pray that the communication and how you set the tone for their life, you pray that they receive that in a spirit of acceptance, and they begin to start having a completely different perspective the next time that they find themselves within a certain space. And you hope, as I always tell my oldest kid, I say, listen, remember this conversation for next time. Now, and Tam will tell her the same thing. Remember this conversation for next time. Does she do it? Probably not. But that's okay, because we continue to keep having the conversation, continue to keep showing grace.
Communicate where God's grace has hit for you. Don't be afraid to let your failures be a part of God's story. You know why? Because your failures are a story of God's faithfulness. Your stories of failure are stories of God's grace. And it doesn't mean you brag about it. It's not that kind of like communicate your failures. It's allowing your kids to understand that, guess what? They failed, so did you. You have space for their failures. God has more space for our failures than anybody. It is okay. It is only another opportunity to see how deep, how wide, and how great God's mercy and God's love is. What will that change for the next generation if this is what we communicate? That we communicate healthy relationship, that we communicate healthy tools, and more than anything, we communicate grace. How much trauma will that remove? How much trauma will that heal?
So the Mesa moment for today is very simple. If you've been healing, but you've been hiding, this may be the time that God is tasking you to help those who are still hurting. There's a lot of people who have gone through traumatic experiences, and you have found yourself healing, and God is healing you, and God is healing you, but because of that experience, you have closed yourself off from being put into a position to where you can help. Let me tell you, there's someone out there who is hurting, who needs to know that you are healing. Never hide the fact that God has healed you.
Amen.
Never hide the fact that God has helped you.
That's right.
If anything, shout to the top of your lungs how God has been faithful, how God has forever changed your experience, because there's someone who needs to know your testimony and your experience. Your experience is not meant for you to hold on to. Your experience is meant for you to disseminate, because there's somebody who's going to be out there looking for that. And how freeing can it be to know that they're not alone? And so we want to leave you with Philippians 1. Want to leave you with Philippians 1.
I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. God is working in you. He will not stop until the other side of heaven. That is a beautiful promise.
And because he's working, there's someone that he wants to work on, but he needs you to do it. He needs you to step out of that space, and he needs you to step out of that shell that you've been in and be the light on a hill that people can see, to where when they're ready, they'll seek you out. I truly believe that God, according to Ephesians 2, that we are his workmanship. God has prepared works for you and for me before time. And I believe that whenever you're ready to come out, God will use you for the benefit and the glory of his kingdom. These are tools for healing that we wanted to share with you today. And we pray that the last 3 weeks have been able to garner some conversation within your home, conversations within your lives, conversations within yourself, reflections for where you are in your life. And I pray today that God has been able to touch you some way, somehow, and that you have experienced something with God that has been magnificent, and that you can be better because of, and that God can truly use your life for the benefit of the kingdom. Will you stand with us now? If you need to be put on Christ today for the remission of your sins, you can do that today. As we told you the last couple of weeks, Jesus is the answer. He is the start. He is the start. He is the start. Jesus says himself, he says, I am Alpha, Omega, I am beginning, I am end.